Well, welcome back everyone. So this week we're going to talk about equilibrium, and equilibrium is all about what are known as reversible reactions. And reversible reactions are reactions that can occur in a forward direction, and the reaction can also happen in a reverse direction. And so one of the places where we see this a lot is in something like the ocean, which contains a large amount of carbonate, and there are a lot of reversible reactions, meaning that the reaction is not just going in one direction. So as an example, if we look at climate change, we look at an increase in carbon dioxide. We can see that carbon dioxide here is increasing. This is carbon dioxide on the y-axis, and as you increase the amount of carbon dioxide in the air, carbon dioxide in the air will dissolve in water to produce carbon dioxide in the aqueous phase. And this can happen both directions. It can go from gas to aqueous, or the carbon dioxide can off-gas out of the ocean and go back into the atmosphere. And so this is a reversible reaction, symbolized by this double-headed arrow, which means that it can go in the forward direction and the reverse direction. And rather interestingly, when carbon dioxide is in the aqueous phase, it will actually dissolve in water, and as it dissolves in water, it will react and it will produce carbonic acid. And carbonic acid, this is a reversible reaction again, carbonic acid itself can dissociate and produce H+ ions. Because it's an acid, by definition it's going to produce H+ ions in water, and it's going to produce the bicarbonate ion as well. And as this carbonic acid breaks to form H+, it can also go the opposite way. And so this is also a reversible reaction, because the reaction can go in the forward direction or it could go in the reverse direction. And as this happens, we produce more H+ ions, which is going to lower the pH of the ocean, so it's going to become more acidic. But again, these are examples of reversible reactions. And so just out of interest, if you increase the amount of H+ in the ocean, then organisms that have shells like corals or mussels or mollusks, or these are what are called ctenophores, they're unable to build their shells. So this is what the shell should look like, and then as you go across, this is an increasing acidity in the ocean, and when the acidity of the ocean gets to a certain point, they're no longer to be able to make a proper shell. So we also see this type of reversible reaction in your lungs and your bloodstream. So carbon dioxide, which is present in your lungs, diffuses into the blood system, and as it diffuses into the blood system, here's CO2, which is now in its aqueous form, reacts with water, produces carbonic acid. Hello, surprise, same reaction again. And then this carbonic acid breaks down, produces bicarbonate and H+ ions. Same reaction, exactly the same thing happening. CO2 gas, CO2 aqueous, reversible reaction into an acid. So there are several equilibrium reactions that happen in the blood as well as the human body. And so when we talk about equilibrium, we're talking about reversible reactions. And if we take this as an example, which is NO2 forming N2O4, there is, as this reaction happens, a forward rate of the reaction, and there's of course a reverse rate. So here this is the forward rate, this is the reverse rate or the back rate. And at equilibrium, the forward reaction and the reverse reaction proceed at equal rates, which basically means that the rate of the forward reaction is going to equal the rate of the reverse reaction or the back reaction, depending how you want to talk about it. And so this is the important thing, that reactions can move both forward and in the reverse direction, and at equilibrium the rates are exactly the same. And so this is not to say that at that point the reaction stops. What this means is that chemical equilibria are dynamic, meaning that the reactions are continually going in the forward direction and then at the same time are going in the back direction. So they're continually proceeding backwards and forwards, but they're occurring at the same rate. And because they're occurring at the same rate, the concentrations of the reactants and the concentrations of the products remain constant at equilibrium. They don't necessarily have to be the same, but the concentration doesn't change. And so there are many examples of chemical equilibrium. So for example, a phase change, such as ice, solid water going to liquid water, that can occur in the forward direction, so we can melt to form liquid water. We could also freeze and go from liquid water to solid water or ice. So these are dynamic reactions or dynamic phase changes that can occur. And we see the same thing as if you open a bottle of soda. A bottle of soda contains large amounts of carbon dioxide molecules dissolved in water, and when you release the pressure, several equilibrium reactions happen, and one of them, of course, is carbon dioxide, which is present in aqueous solution, will now go to carbon dioxide in the gas phase, and this again is a reversible reaction. So it goes from aqueous to gas. Here's the gas, and this reaction is reversible because if you put the lid back on, some of that CO2 would go back into solution, and that's how we make fizzy drinks anyway. And so we see chemical reaction in many different chemical equilibrium in many different places. So if we were to form stalagmites and stalactites, we would have some carbon dioxide gas here. If we had this calcium carbonate here is the formation of a stalagmite, and if you take this and you add some water and you add some CO2, you're actually going to produce calcium 2+ ions and bicarbonate ions, and this reaction can go backwards or forwards. And so if it went this direction backwards, it would produce solid calcium carbonate, which is what these stalagmites look like. If on the other hand you wanted to degrade them, you could add more water to them, and you would need to add some CO2 gas, which would be acting a bit like an acid at that point, and the reaction would go in the forward direction. So there are many chemical equilibria that we see. And so this is one of the take-home messages, is that all reactions are reversible. But for many reactions, they typically proceed in one direction until all the reactants are exhausted. And then they'll only reverse under certain conditions. So for example, when we talk about a phase change like ice going to liquid water, that is typically going to occur in the forward direction at high temperature. The ice is going to melt, it's going to produce liquid water, and when there's no ice left, that phase change, that equilibrium is not going to be set up, it's not going to carry on, you're just going to have a big pool of water. If you change the temperature, of course, it could reverse, and that's what this means, it will reverse under certain conditions. And so that's important to realize, that all reactions have the possibility of being reversible. And this really comes down to, when you work in lab we'll talk about stoichiometry, and we'll talk about ideal yields of materials, or theoretical yields. And theoretical yields are what you would expect from looking at the chemical equation. However, actually when you do an experiment, often you don't get 100% yield. You might get 70% or 50% of the product being formed. And the reason for this is that many of these reactions have a reversible component to them. So the reaction won't go completely to the right, to the products, and so some of it is related to the reversibility of these chemical reactions. And so the whole field of equilibrium looks at the extent of a chemical reaction. And so we considered this reaction, and this is also a reaction that you'll see in your textbook. So I recommend that you read the first two parts of the equilibrium chapter in your textbook, and then move on to looking at the different problems that we're going to look at.